The doctor pressed a folded note into my hand just as my son stepped out to answer a phone call in the hospital hallway. His voice was calm, almost routine, but his eyes held mine for a second longer than they should have. "Read it when you're alone, Mrs. Baker." I waited until I locked myself inside the restroom before opening it. My fingers trembled as the paper unfolded. The message was only one sentence. "Do not go home with your son tonight. Someone is trying to have you declared mentally incompetent before morning, and downstairs in the lobby my son Daniel was waiting to take me home." If you're listening to this story right now, I want you to pause for a second and imagine being in my place. What would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly became the person you were warned about? Stories like this are painful to tell, but they matter. So if you're here with me, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And more importantly, tell me honestly, would you still get in the car with your son? Because that was the decision I had to make next. My name is Judith Baker, and until the day that note appeared in my hand, I believed I had lived a very ordinary life. For 42 years, my world revolved around a small brick house on the north side of Columbus, Ohio, a quiet street lined with maple trees, and a man named Thomas Baker. Tom was the kind of husband people describe as dependable. Not flashy, not dramatic, just steady. In a way that makes you feel safe without ever needing to say the word. He fixed leaky faucets on Saturday mornings. He always filled my gas tank before winter storms. Every anniversary, no matter how busy work became, he brought home the same yellow roses. When Tom died 8 months ago, it felt as if someone had quietly removed the floor beneath my feet. Lung cancer. That was the official explanation. But grief doesn't care about official explanations. It simply arrives, sits in your living room, and refuses to leave. For weeks after the funeral, the house felt enormous. Every room echoed with memories. I would walk into the kitchen expecting to see Tom reading the newspaper at the table, only to remember again that he wasn't there anymore. That was when my son Daniel stepped in. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now," he said one evening about 3 weeks after the funeral. Daniel had always been a capable man. At 41, he worked in small business, consulting something to do with helping struggling companies reorganize their finances. I never understood the details, but he spoke confidently about it. His wife Lauren stood beside him that night in my living room, her hand resting gently on his arm. "We were thinking," Lauren said softly, "maybe we could stay here for a little while, just until things feel normal again." At the time, it sounded like kindness. I remember looking around the house, feeling the quiet pressing in from every corner, and thinking that maybe having people around would help. "Just temporarily," Daniel added. "Until you're back on your feet." So they moved into the guest bedroom upstairs. At first, it really did feel like help. Daniel started handling errands that Tom used to do. He took over the lawn care, fixed the garage door that had been sticking, and insisted on driving me to doctor appointments. Lauren helped organize the kitchen cabinets and brought groceries home after work. For a while, I told my friends how lucky I was. "Not everyone has children willing to step in like that," I said. Looking back now, I can still feel the exact moment when something began to change. It didn't happen all at once. It was more like a slow shift, small things that felt slightly off, but never alarming enough to question. The first time was about 2 months after they moved in. I had been expecting a letter from the bank about renewing a certificate of deposit Tom and I had held for years. I remember checking the mail that afternoon and finding nothing. 2 days later, Daniel mentioned it casually over dinner. "Mom, I saw that bank letter. Don't worry about it, I'll take care of the paperwork." I remember pausing with my fork halfway to my mouth. "You saw it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said easily. "It came yesterday." That confused me because I was the one who usually brought the mail inside, but I assumed I must have missed it somehow. Grief can do that to your memory. At least that's what people kept telling me. After that, Daniel started stepping into more parts of my daily routine. He began answering the house phone when it rang. "Hello." "Yes, this is Judith Baker's son," I would hear him say. Sometimes he would hand the phone to me afterward, sometimes he wouldn't. When bills arrived, he started sorting them. "Mom, there's no reason for you to stress about paperwork right now," he told me one afternoon while stacking envelopes neatly on the kitchen counter. Let me handle it. At the time, I thought it was thoughtful, but slowly another pattern began to appear. Daniel started correcting me in conversations. One evening, we were sitting with my neighbor Margaret, who had stopped by with a casserole. Margaret asked how I had been sleeping. "Oh, better lately," I said. "I finally got through the night without waking up." Daniel smiled politely but shook his head. "Well, mostly," he added. "Mom's had a few rough nights. Her memory's been a little foggy since Dad passed. I remember feeling a small sting of embarrassment. I'm just grieving," I said quickly. "Of course," Daniel replied. "That's what I mean." Another time during a phone call with my church friend Linda, I mentioned that I planned to drive myself to Bible study again soon. Daniel overheard from the kitchen. "Mom, remember when you got lost driving back from the pharmacy last month?" he said gently. I froze. "I didn't get lost," I answered. "You called me because you couldn't find the right street," he said. "That was construction," I insisted. He only smiled as if humoring me. It was subtle, always subtle. Never accusations, just little corrections, small reminders. Lauren joined in sometimes too, though in a quieter way. "Maybe it would be easier if we simplified things for you," she suggested one evening while washing dishes. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, fewer bills to track fewer things to remember." She smiled warmly. "We just want you to feel safe." The strange thing was none of it felt threatening at the time. It felt protective. Even when Daniel started organizing my medications. "I'll keep track of these," he said one morning, lining up the bottles on the counter. "Doctors hate it when people mix things up. I've been managing pills for 30 years, I laughed. "I know," he said gently, "but now you don't have to." I wish I could say that something inside me recognized what was happening, but the truth is, grief makes you tired. When you're tired enough, you stop questioning help. That was my life for months, until the morning I felt dizzy at church. I remember standing during a hymn when the room suddenly tilted slightly like the floor had shifted beneath me. A woman beside me grabbed my arm. "Judith, are you okay?" The next thing I knew, Daniel was driving me to Riverside Methodist Hospital. He insisted on staying with me through every step of the checkup. In the exam room, when the nurse asked about medications, Daniel answered before I could. When the doctor asked about recent confusion, Daniel leaned forward. "She's been having some trouble remembering things," he said carefully. I remember looking at him surprised. "Daniel, it's nothing dramatic," he added quickly. "Just small stuff." Dr. Michael Harris listened quietly. He asked me a few simple questions. "What day of the week is it?" "Wednesday," I answered. "And the month April," he nodded slowly. But Daniel kept talking. "There was an incident with the stove last week," he said. "That didn't happen," I replied. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it's okay." His tone was calm, patient, the way people speak to someone they believe is fragile. At the time, I thought he was simply worried, but now, standing in that hospital restroom with the note trembling in my hand, those moments replayed differently in my mind. Every answer he had given, every correction, every gentle comment about my memory slipping, it suddenly felt less like concern and more like a story being carefully built. Downstairs in the lobby, my son Daniel was still waiting to drive me home, and for the first time in 41 years of being his mother, I realized something terrifying. I no longer knew if home was safe. I stood in that hospital restroom for what must have been 5 full minutes, staring at the note in my hands. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above me. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rattled across the floor, followed by the faint murmur of nurses talking. But inside that small tiled room, everything felt unnaturally still. The message from Dr. Michael Harris was short, almost clinical. "Do not go home with your son tonight. Someone is trying to have you declared mentally incompetent before morning." I read it again and again. Each time the words felt heavier. Declared mentally incompetent before morning. The idea sounded absurd. I was 68 years old, not 88. I still drove myself to church. I paid my own bills. Well, I had paid them before Daniel started helping. I read 2 books a week and finished crossword puzzles faster than half the women in my Bible study group. How could anyone believe I was incompetent unless someone had been convincing them? A sudden memory surfaced Daniel sitting beside my hospital bed earlier that afternoon while the nurse reviewed my intake information. "Has your mother experienced any confusion recently?" the nurse asked. Daniel leaned forward immediately. "A little," he said. "She's been under a lot of stress since my father passed." I remember turning toward him. "Daniel." "It's okay, Mom," he said, gently squeezing my shoulder. "You don't have to be embarrassed about it. At the time, I thought he was just trying to explain things. Now I realized something different. He hadn't been explaining. He had been establishing a narrative." I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my cardigan. When I opened the restroom door, the hallway looked the same as it had 10 minutes earlier. Patients walking slowly with IV poles. Nurses moving between rooms, a television mounted near the ceiling playing a muted news broadcast. Normal. Everything looked completely normal, but my heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I walked back toward my hospital room. Daniel was standing just outside the door, leaning against the wall while typing on his phone. When he saw me, he smiled immediately. "There you are," he said. "I was starting to think they kidnapped you." He said it like a joke. I forced myself to smile back. Just needed a minute. He slipped his phone into his pocket and stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, ready to go home. The word home felt strange suddenly. I studied his face carefully. Daniel had always looked a little like Tom. Same strong jawline, same dark hair that had only recently begun to show hints of gray at the temples. If you had seen him across a crowded room, you might have mistaken him for his father 20 years earlier. But there was something in his expression now that made me uneasy. Not anger, not impatience, something more controlled. Almost, I said, picking up my purse from the chair beside the bed. I think the doctor wanted to speak with me once more before discharge. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Really, I thought we were done. I might have misunderstood," I said quickly. "Let me check." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on me a moment longer than usual. "Sure," he said. "I'll wait." I stepped back into the hallway again, pretending to scan the corridor for Dr. Harris. In reality, I was trying to breathe. The note burned against my chest through the fabric of my sweater. "Someone is trying to have you declared mentally incompetent. Someone. Dr. Harris hadn't written your son, but he had handed me the message while Daniel was out of the room. And now Daniel was downstairs waiting to take me home. The connection was impossible to ignore. My mind started replaying the entire hospital visit from the beginning. When we first arrived at the emergency intake desk, Daniel had spoken to the receptionist before I could even open my mouth. "My mother's been dizzy today," he said. "She's also had some episodes of confusion lately." Confusion? That word again. Then during triage, the nurse asked about medications. Daniel answered. When the nurse asked about recent memory problems, Daniel answered again. Each time he had spoken calmly, confidently, like someone providing helpful background information. And every time I had simply nodded along, because that's what mothers do when their sons speak for them. We trust them. Now suddenly I wondered how those answers had been written down. Had the nurse recorded them as observations? Had the doctor believed them? Had they become part of my medical file? My stomach tightened. If someone wanted to convince a court that an older woman was mentally declining, what better evidence than hospital records describing confusion? Footsteps approached down the hallway. I looked up to see Dr. Michael Harris walking toward me. He slowed slightly when he saw me standing alone. "Mrs. Baker," he said quietly. I glanced over my shoulder toward my hospital room. Daniel was still inside, sitting in the chair by the window. "I read your note," I whispered. Dr. Harris gave a small nod. "I thought you might." My voice dropped even lower. "What's happening?" For a moment he didn't answer. He simply looked down the hallway to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. Then he spoke carefully. "I can't share confidential reports," he said. "But I can tell you this, someone contacted the hospital earlier today expressing concern about your mental capacity." My throat tightened. "Concern, yes," he said. "Specifically that you might be experiencing cognitive decline and may not be able to safely manage your medications or finances." "That's ridiculous," I said softly. "I know," he replied. His calm certainty startled me. "You know, I asked." Dr. Harris nodded again. "I ran a full cognitive screening during your exam. Your responses were completely normal. Relief washed through me, but it lasted only a second. Then why would anyone?" Because he interrupted gently, "If someone is attempting to pursue an emergency guardianship or conservatorship, they need supporting documentation." My chest felt tight again. "Documentation like Medical records, yes. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. So someone is trying to tell the court that I'm incompetent, I said slowly. That appears to be the direction this could be heading, he replied. And you think it could happen tonight? He hesitated before answering. In some cases, yes. I gripped the strap of my purse harder. But you can stop it, right? I asked. Dr. Harris shook his head. Not exactly. Medical professionals can provide evaluations, but legal decisions happen outside the hospital. So what do? I asked. For the first time, the doctor's expression softened slightly. That's why I wrote the note. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If someone is preparing a guardianship petition based on claims about your confusion, the worst thing you could do tonight is return to an environment where that narrative continues unchecked. My mind immediately pictured Daniel waiting in the room behind me. You mean, go somewhere else, I said. Yes. Without my son. Yes. The word son hung in the air between us. Neither of us said Daniel's name, but we didn't need to. Is it him? I asked quietly. Dr. Harris exhaled slowly. I can't answer that directly, he said. But I can tell you that the person who raised concerns today is someone very close to you. My heart sank. That was all the confirmation I needed. From inside the hospital room, I heard Daniel's voice call out, "Mom, everything okay out there?" Dr. Harris straightened. "You should make a decision soon," he said softly. "What kind of decision?" I asked. He met my eyes. "Who you trust?" For a long moment I couldn't move, because trusting Daniel had never been a decision before. It had simply been part of being his mother. Now I wasn't sure if that trust had been quietly used against me. Daniel stepped into the doorway behind me. "There you are," he said with a relaxed smile. Ready to go, I looked at him. Then I thought about the note in my pocket, about the words before morning. And suddenly I realized something that made my blood run cold. Whatever Daniel had planned, it was already in motion. For a moment, I simply stood there in the hospital hallway looking at my son. Daniel's smile was easy and familiar, the same smile he had worn since he was a boy, trying to convince me he had finished his homework when he hadn't. "Mom?" he said again. "Everything okay?" Behind him, the afternoon sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long, pale rectangles of light across the polished floor. Everything looked normal, but the note in my pocket felt like a stone against my chest. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "Yes," I said, hoping my voice sounded steady, just waiting for Dr. Harris to finish something. Daniel glanced toward the hallway where the doctor had disappeared. "That's strange," he said casually. "He told me you were cleared to leave." My heart skipped. "Did he?" I asked. "Yeah." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe he got called away." He stepped forward and gently reached for my purse. "Come on, let's get you home." The word home again. It sounded harmless, almost comforting. But now I couldn't stop hearing Dr. Harris's warning echoing in my mind. "Do not go home with your son tonight. I needed time to think." "Actually," I said, adjusting the strap of my purse before Daniel could take it, "I feel like I should sit down for a minute first." Daniel frowned slightly. "You're feeling dizzy again, just a little tired." "That's exactly why you should get home and rest," he said quickly. "Hospitals are the worst place to recover." He wasn't wrong, but something about the urgency in his voice made my stomach tighten. "I'll just grab a coffee," I said, "then we can go." Daniel hesitated. For the first time that afternoon, I saw something flicker across his face, something sharp and calculating. Then it disappeared. "Sure," he said lightly. "I'll walk with you." "No need," I replied quickly. "You've been sitting here all afternoon. Stretch your legs or something, I'm fine." The way he said it was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I forced a small laugh. "Daniel." "I'm not escaping," I said. "It's just coffee." He studied me for another moment. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said, "but I'll meet you downstairs in 10 minutes. Perfect." I turned and walked toward the elevators before he could change his mind. My legs felt oddly stiff, as if the hallway floor had turned into thick mud. Inside the elevator, I pressed the button for the first floor and watched the doors slide shut. The moment they closed, my composure cracked. My hands began to shake. The elevator hummed softly as it descended. Think, Judith. Just think. If If Daniel had really started some kind of legal process, something about guardianship or incompetence, then going home with him could mean walking straight into a situation where I had no control. Doctor. Harris had said the worst thing I could do was return to an environment where the story about my confusion continued. But where else could I go? The elevator doors opened to the hospital lobby. Families sat in rows of plastic chairs. A television played quietly above the reception desk. Someone pushed a wheelchair past me toward the entrance. I walked toward the coffee stand near the windows. My heart was still pounding. As I waited in line, I pulled the note from my pocket again and read it one more time. The handwriting was quick but clear. Do not go home with your son tonight. Someone is trying to have you declared mentally incompetent before morning. If you feel unsafe, speak to the hospital social worker immediately. Social worker. That part I had almost forgotten. The barista handed me a paper cup of coffee, but I barely tasted it as I walked toward the information desk. A young woman in blue scrubs looked up from her computer. Can I help you? Yes, I said quietly. I need to speak with a hospital social worker. She nodded immediately. Of course. One moment. She picked up the phone beside her and spoke softly into it. While she talked, I looked toward the glass entrance doors. Daniel was standing outside on the sidewalk. He must have taken the stairs. He was pacing slowly, his phone pressed to his ear. From where I stood, I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his posture was tense, one hand running through his hair as he spoke. Was he talking about me? The thought made my stomach twist. Mrs. Baker. I turned. A woman in her mid-40s was approaching the desk. She wore a hospital badge clipped to a gray cardigan. Hi, she said warmly. I'm Angela Ruiz. I'm one of the social workers here. Thank you for seeing me, I said. She glanced toward the seating area. Would you like to sit somewhere private? Yes, please? Angela led me down a short hallway beside the lobby into a small office with 2 chairs and a desk. The door closed softly behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Angela sat across from me and folded her hands calmly. What can I help you with today, Mrs. Baker? My voice came out quieter than I expected. My doctor gave me a note. Her expression shifted slightly. What kind of note? I slid the folded paper across the desk. Angela read it carefully. Then she leaned back in her chair and studied me with a serious expression. Did Dr. Harris explain anything else to you? She asked. Only that someone had raised concerns about my mental capacity. Angela nodded slowly. That can happen in a few situations, she said, such as, well, she explained gently, sometimes family members petition the court for emergency guardianship if they believe an older relative can't safely manage their own affairs. Emergency guardianship, I repeated. Yes. What does that mean exactly? It means the court can temporarily give another person legal authority over your decisions, financial, medical, sometimes even where you live. The room suddenly felt smaller. And how fast can that happen? I asked. Angela hesitated before answering. In urgent cases, very quickly. How quickly? Sometimes within 24 hours. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Could it happen tonight? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked another question. Do you feel safe going home tonight? The question hung in the air. I thought about Daniel pacing outside the hospital doors, about the careful way he had corrected me during the doctor's appointment, about the months of small changes in the house. I don't know, I admitted. Angela nodded. That's an important answer. What should I do? I asked. Well, she said calmly, the most important thing right now is making sure you have control over your environment and your documents. My documents, your identification, financial records, legal paperwork, anything related to property or power of attorney. The words power of attorney made my chest tighten. I'm not sure where all of that is right now, I said slowly. Then tonight might be a good time to stay somewhere neutral, Angela said. Somewhere neutral with someone you trust. Immediately, one name came to mind. Denise Carter. Denise and I had been friends for nearly 30 years. We met when our sons were in Little League together. She had spent most of her career working at the Franklin County Probate Court before retiring last year. If anyone understood guardianship laws, it would be Denise. I could stay with a friend, I said. Angela smiled slightly. That sounds like a good idea. But Daniel is waiting outside, I said. Angela glanced toward the window. Do you feel comfortable telling him your plans? I pictured the look on Daniel's face if I told him I was staying somewhere else. No, not comfortable at all. I think I'll say the hospital wants to run more tests, I said quietly. Angela nodded. That's your decision. I stood up slowly. My legs still felt unsteady. Mrs. Baker Angela said gently as I reached the door, "Yes, if your instincts are telling you something is wrong, it's okay to listen to them." For months I had ignored that small voice in my mind, but now it was louder than ever. As I stepped back into the hospital lobby, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over one name, Denise Carter. I pressed the call button. When she answered, her voice was cheerful. "Judith, everything okay?" I swallowed. "Denise, I need a place to stay tonight." There was a pause. Then her voice changed instantly. What happened? I looked through the glass doors at my son waiting outside, and for the first time in my life, I heard myself say the words I never thought I would. I think Daniel is trying to take control of my life. Denise didn't respond right away. For a moment, all I could hear through the phone was the faint sound of a television in the background and the ticking of what I guessed was the old clock she kept in her living room. Then she said very calmly, "Judith, where are you right now? At Riverside Methodist Hospital. Are you alone?" "Yes, is Daniel with you? He's outside the building." There was another short silence. When Denise spoke again, her voice had changed completely. The warmth was still there, but underneath it was the tone I remembered from years ago when she used to talk about difficult cases at the probate court. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "Do not go home with him tonight." Those were almost the exact words Dr. Harris had written. My stomach tightened. "I wasn't planning to," I said quietly. "Good," she replied. "Can you get to the front entrance without him seeing you?" I glanced toward the glass doors. Daniel was still outside on the sidewalk, pacing slowly with his phone pressed to his ear. "I think so," I said. "Then here's what we're going to do," Denise continued. "Walk out of the hospital like you're leaving, but instead of getting in his car, tell him the hospital wants to run additional tests and that you'll be staying overnight." "That's a lie," I said automatically. Judith, Denise said gently but firmly, if someone is preparing a guardianship petition against you, the priority right now is protecting yourself. The word guardianship made my chest tighten again. "You really think that's what this is?" I asked. Denise didn't hesitate. "If Daniel has been telling doctors or other professionals that you're confused or unsafe, then yes. That's exactly what it sounds like." My hands began to shake again. "But why would he do that?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Denise said, "but we can figure that out later. Right now, you need to get out of there without raising suspicion." I glanced through the glass again. Daniel had stopped pacing and was now standing still, looking down at his phone. "What if he insists on driving me home?" I asked. "Then you repeat that the hospital wants to keep you overnight for observation," Denise said. "And if he asks to come inside, tell him visiting hours are over." I exhaled slowly. "And then you take a cab or rideshare to my house. You're sure that's okay?" I asked. "Judith," she said softly, "you've been my friend for 30 years. My guest room is always okay." Emotion suddenly pressed against my throat. "Thank you. We'll talk when you get here," she said. And Judith, "Yes, don't confront Daniel tonight." "Why not?" "Because if he really is planning something, the last thing you want to do is alert him before you understand the full situation." She was right. The conversation ended, and I slipped my phone back into my purse. Now I just had to get past my son. I walked toward the glass doors, slowly trying to look relaxed. Outside, the air was cool and carried the faint smell of rain. Daniel saw me immediately. "There you are," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I was wondering where you went." "I needed to speak with someone," I said. "Everything okay?" I nodded, mostly, but the doctor wants to keep me overnight for observation. Daniel blinked. "Overnight, yes. That doesn't make sense," he said quickly. "They already discharged you. They changed their minds." "Why? Because of the dizziness earlier," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "They just want to be careful." Daniel frowned. "I can come sit with you," he said. "That's not necessary. It's no trouble." "Daniel," I said gently, "I'll probably just sleep. There's no reason for you to waste the night in a hospital chair." He studied my face carefully. For a moment, I was afraid he could see through me. Then he sighed. "Okay," he said, "if that's what you want." Relief washed through me so suddenly I almost felt weak. "I'll come back in the morning," he added. "That's fine." He hesitated again. "You're sure you're okay?" "Yes." He leaned forward and hugged me briefly. His arms felt strong, familiar. For a split second, a painful thought crossed my mind. What if the doctor was wrong? What if I was about to accuse my own son of something terrible for no reason? But then I remembered the note and the months of small changes in my life. Daniel stepped back. "Call me if you need anything tonight," he said. "I will." He gave one last nod and walked toward the parking lot. I watched his car disappear down the street. Only then did I realize how tightly I had been holding my breath. I turned and walked back into the hospital lobby. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the back seat of a rideshare car heading toward Denise's neighborhood. The city lights of Columbus blurred past the window. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened over the past few hours. The doctor's warning, the conversation with Angela, Denise's certainty that something serious might be happening. But the most unsettling thought was still the simplest one. If Daniel had really been trying to convince people I was incompetent, then the groundwork had probably started long before today. The car turned onto a quiet residential street lined with old oak trees. Denise's house sat halfway down the block, a white two-story with a wide porch and yellow porch light glowing warmly against the dark. The driver pulled to the curb. "We're here," he said. I stepped out of the car and walked up the short path to the front door. Before I could knock, it opened. Denise stood there in a gray sweater and reading glasses. She pulled me into a tight hug. "Come inside," she said. The warmth of her living room wrapped around me immediately. Bookshelves lined the walls, and the familiar smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. For the first time since leaving the hospital, my shoulders relaxed slightly. Denise led me to the couch. "Sit," she said. "You look like you've had quite a day." That's an understatement. She disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned with 2 mugs of tea. Then she sat across from me, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "Start from the beginning," she said. So I told her everything. The dizziness at church, the hospital visit, Daniel answering questions for me, Dr. Harris's note, Angela's explanation about guardianship. Denise listened without interrupting. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Judith," she said carefully, "I'm going to ask you a question." "Okay. Over the past few months, have you signed any documents Daniel or Lauren brought you?" I thought about it. After Tom's funeral, there had been a stack of papers. Bank forms, insurance updates, things Daniel said needed to be cleaned up. I might have, I admitted. Denise nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. Why she leaned back in her chair. Because if someone wanted legal control over your finances or property, she said one of the easiest ways to start would be getting you to sign a durable power of attorney. The words made my stomach drop. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Daniel could legally act on your behalf." "For what?" Denise looked at me steadily. "For almost everything." The room suddenly felt colder. "But I would remember signing something like that," I said. "Not necessarily," Denise replied quietly, especially if it was buried inside a stack of paperwork. My mind raced back to that afternoon after Tom's funeral. Lauren sitting beside me at the dining table. Daniel pointing to different lines. "Just routine updates, Mom. Sign here. Initial there." My hands began to tremble again. Denise watched my expression carefully. "What else did you notice lately?" she asked. I tried to think. Bills Daniel insisted on paying, mail disappearing, phone calls he answered, then something else surfaced in my memory. "Denise," I said slowly. "Yes. Last week I saw a charge on my bank statement I didn't recognize. What kind of charge? A monthly payment? For what I swallowed. A place called Maple Grove Memory Care Center?" Denise's eyes widened slightly. "And you never agreed to that, no?" She leaned forward. "Judith," she said quietly. "Yes, I think your son might already be preparing to move you into a care facility." The words hit me like cold water. But why I whispered? Denise didn't answer right away. Instead, she said something that made my heart sink even further. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "we're going to call a lawyer." That night, I barely slept. Denise had prepared the guest room the way she always did, fresh sheets, a folded blanket at the foot of the bed, and a small lamp glowing softly on the nightstand. The room was comfortable. Familiar even, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, the same questions returned. Had Daniel really been planning this for months? Had I already signed something that gave him control? And how close had I come to losing everything without realizing it? Around 3 a.m, I got up and walked quietly down the hallway toward the kitchen. Denise was already there. She was sitting at the table in her robe with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers in front of her. "You couldn't sleep either," she said, glancing up. I shook my head and sat down across from her. "No." She slid a mug toward me. "Coffee helps with thinking." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. Denise tapped one of the papers in front of her. "I did a little reading last night," she said. "You mean researching?" She nodded. "Judith, if someone wanted to establish legal guardianship over you, they would typically need 3 things. What things? First, statements suggesting cognitive decline. I immediately thought of Daniel speaking to the doctor. Second, Denise, continued medical documentation that appears to support those claims. Hospital records, I said quietly. Exactly. And the third, evidence that the person requesting guardianship is acting in your best interest. I looked at her. You mean Daniel? Yes. Silence settled between us for a moment. So what happens next? I asked. Well, Denise said that depends on whether Daniel has already filed something with the court. How would we find that out? We call someone who knows the system. Who? Denise leaned back in her chair. A lawyer. The word made my stomach tighten. I've never needed a lawyer before, I said. You do now. Do you know one? Denise nodded slowly. Rachel Monroe. Who is she? She specializes in elder law and estate protection, Denise said. I used to see her in court all the time when I worked at the probate office. Is she good? Denise gave a short laugh. Judith Rachel Monroe is the kind of lawyer other lawyers get nervous around. That was reassuring. Denise picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I'll call her office as soon as they open. What time is that, 8? I glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:17 a.m. The 2 hours that followed felt longer than the entire previous day. Denise tried to distract me by talking about ordinary things, her garden, the neighbors, a new book she had started reading, but my mind kept drifting back to Daniel. I remembered him as a boy building Lego castles on the living room floor. I remembered cheering for him at baseball games. I remembered the day he graduated from college, standing tall in his cap and gown, while Tom wiped tears from his eyes. How could that boy become someone capable of plotting against his own mother? At exactly 8 o'clock, Denise dialed Rachel Monroe's office. The receptionist answered. Yes, Denise said. My name is Denise Carter. I'm calling because I need to schedule an urgent consultation for a friend regarding potential guardianship issues. There was a pause while the receptionist responded. Denise nodded slowly. Yes, she's here with me. Another pause. Denise covered the phone and looked at me. She can see us at 10, she whispered. I exhaled slowly. That soon, she said it sounded serious. Denise returned to the call. Yes, we'll be there. Thank you. She hung up and looked at me. 10 o'clock. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. We dressed quickly and drove across Columbus toward a row of older brick office buildings near downtown. Rachel Monroe's office occupied the second floor of a building that looked like it had been converted from an old townhouse. Inside, the waiting room was quiet and professional. Framed certificates lined the walls. A receptionist greeted us politely and asked us to sit. 10 minutes later, a tall woman with dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes stepped into the room. Mrs. Baker, she said. I stood. Yes, I'm Rachel Monroe. She shook my hand firmly. Please come in. Her office was spacious but uncluttered. A large desk sat near the window and several thick legal books filled the shelves behind it. Rachel gestured toward 2 chairs. Have a seat. Denise and I sat down. Rachel opened a notebook. Denise told my receptionist this might involve a possible guardianship issue, she said. Why don't you start from the beginning? So I did. I explained everything. The dizziness at church, the hospital visit, Daniel speaking for me during the exam, doctor. Harris's warning note, Angela the social worker, the suspicious bank payment to Maple Grove Memory Care Center. Rachel listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. Mrs. Baker, she said carefully, has your son asked you to sign any documents recently? Yes. What kind, I'm not sure. There were several papers after my husband passed away. Did you read them? Some of them. Do you remember signing anything labeled durable power of attorney? I don't remember that phrase specifically. Rachel nodded slowly. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. My stomach tightened again. What would that document allow Daniel to do, I asked. Potentially quite a lot, Rachel said, such as access bank accounts, manage property, make financial decisions in your name. I felt the room spin slightly, even without my permission. With your permission if you signed the document. Denise leaned forward. What about guardianship, she asked. Rachel folded her hands. That's a separate process. Guardianship requires court approval and usually medical evaluations. I had a medical evaluation yesterday, I said. Yes, Rachel replied. And fortunately, according to what you described, your doctor did not find evidence of cognitive decline. That's true. Rachel nodded. That works strongly in your favor. Favor, I repeated, yes. Because if someone were attempting to build a case that you're mentally incompetent, medical documentation contradicting that claim could stop the process. Relief washed through me slightly. So Daniel might fail, I said. Rachel looked thoughtful. Possibly. But Denise asked, but if he already has financial access through a power of attorney, he could still cause damage before anything reaches court. My heart sank again. What kind of damage? Rachel spoke calmly. He could move funds, alter payment structures, or attempt to transfer property. That sounds like theft, I said. It can become theft, Rachel replied. Silence filled the office. Then Rachel leaned forward slightly. There's another important question. What I asked, why would your son want legal control over your finances? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped, because the truth was, I had no idea. Rachel studied my expression carefully. Have you noticed any financial pressure in Daniel's life, she asked. Not really. Business problems, I don't think so. Debt, I've never asked. Rachel nodded slowly. People rarely ask. She closed her notebook. Here's what I recommend, she said. What I asked. First, we immediately secure your financial accounts. How I'll contact your bank and request temporary restrictions until we confirm who has authorized access. Okay. Second, she continued, we obtain copies of every document you signed in the past year. And third, Rachel's expression hardened slightly. We investigate your son. The words felt strange. Investigate my son. Is that really necessary? I asked quietly. Rachel held my gaze. If someone is attempting to legally remove your independence, she said, then yes. She paused. And Mrs. Baker, there's something else. What in situations like this, the legal paperwork often isn't the entire plan. What do you mean? Rachel leaned forward. Sometimes, she said slowly, families also prepare to physically relocate the person they're trying to control. My chest tightened. Relocate to a care facility? Suddenly, the charge on my bank statement flashed through my mind. Maple Grove Memory Care Center. Rachel watched my reaction carefully. Mrs. Baker, she said quietly. Yes, if your son is planning what I think he might be planning. She paused. Then last night's hospital visit may have interrupted something much bigger. Rachel Monroe's words followed me out of her office like a shadow. Last night's hospital visit may have interrupted something much bigger. The idea settled uncomfortably in my chest as Denise and I walked down the narrow staircase of the law office building and stepped out into the bright Columbus morning. Cars moved steadily along the street. Office workers hurried past with coffee cups in their hands. Everything in the city seemed perfectly ordinary, but my life no longer felt ordinary. Denise unlocked her car and we climbed inside. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then she turned the key in the ignition and looked at me. How are you holding up? I stared out the windshield at the traffic light changing from red to green. I feel like I'm watching someone else's life, I said quietly. That's normal, is it? Denise nodded. When betrayal comes from someone you trust, your brain tries to reject it at first. I swallowed. I keep remembering Daniel as a little boy, I said. I keep thinking, maybe there's some misunderstanding. Denise didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled the car into traffic and drove slowly toward her neighborhood. After a moment, she said Rachel seemed pretty certain something serious is going on. Yes, and she's not the kind of lawyer who jumps to conclusions. I noticed. The silence returned. Then Denise said something that made my stomach tighten again. What did you think about the investigator she mentioned? I looked at her. You mean Kevin Doyle? Yes. Rachel had explained before we left that she worked with a private investigator who specialized in financial cases involving elder abuse and guardianship disputes. At the time, the idea had felt extreme. Now it felt necessary. I don't know, I admitted. You're worried about spying on your own son. Yes, Denise nodded slowly. That's understandable. But Rachel said we need proof, I added. And she's right. We drove for another minute before Denise spoke again. You know, she said carefully, when I worked at the probate court, I saw cases like this sometimes. Cases like what adult children trying to gain control over their parents' finances. I turned toward her. How often, more often than people realize? And were they usually right, I asked. About the parents being incompetent, yes. Denise shook her head. Not always. What happened in the other cases? She hesitated before answering. In the worst ones, the children were motivated by money. The word landed heavily between us. Money. Tom and I had never considered ourselves wealthy, but we had been careful. 40 years of steady saving had left us with a paid-off house, a comfortable retirement account, and the investments Tom managed before he died. Enough to live well, enough to be tempting. Do you think Daniel is in financial trouble? Denise asked. I honestly don't know. You never asked about his business. He always said things were fine. Denise sighed. People rarely admit when things aren't fine. We reached her house and parked in the driveway. Inside, Denise set her purse on the kitchen counter while I sat at the table. My mind kept replaying the conversation with Rachel. Investigate your son. Secure your bank accounts. Someone may already be preparing to move you into a facility. It felt surreal. Denise opened the refrigerator and pulled out a pitcher of iced tea. Drink something, she said, setting a glass in front of me. I took a sip. The cool liquid steadied me slightly. So what happens next? I asked. Denise leaned against the counter. Well, Rachel said she'd contact your bank this afternoon. Yes, and she's going to request copies of any documents you signed recently. That part worries me. Why? Because I truly don't remember everything I signed after Tom died. Denise nodded. Grief makes people vulnerable, I trusted Daniel. I said quietly, I know. Just then, Denise's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. It's Rachel. She answered immediately. Hello? I watched her expression change as she listened. What she said suddenly. She turned toward me. Rachel wants to speak with you. My heart began to pound again. Denise handed me the phone. Hello? I said, Mrs. Baker Rachel's voice said on the other end. I'm sorry to call so quickly, but something just came up. What is it? I contacted your bank this morning to request temporary account protections, and there was already a request submitted yesterday afternoon. My chest tightened. A request for what? For financial access authorization under a power of attorney. I felt the room spin slightly. Submitted by who Rachel didn't hesitate. Your son. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I never approved that I said. Are you sure I don't remember signing anything like that? That doesn't mean the document doesn't exist, Rachel replied carefully. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? I asked. It means Daniel may already possess paperwork claiming he has legal authority to act on your behalf. I looked at Denise. Her expression had gone pale. What can he do with that? I asked. Potentially a lot, Rachel said. Transfer funds, set up automatic payments, possibly even authorize medical decisions. Medical decisions. My mind flashed back to the charge on my bank statement. Maple Grove Memory Care Center. Rachel, I said slowly. Yes, there's something else. What I saw a recurring payment on my bank account last week. What kind of payment to a place called Maple Grove Memory Care Center? There was a pause on the line. Then Rachel spoke very quietly. Are you certain? Yes. And you never agreed to that no. Another pause. Then Rachel said something that made my blood run cold. I'm looking at something interesting right now. When I contacted your bank, they mentioned a pre-authorized facility intake deposit that was processed 2 weeks ago. Facility intake, I repeated. Yes, for Maple Grove. The room suddenly felt very small. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Rachel said carefully, someone has already reserved a place for you at that facility. Denise stared at me across the table. I felt like the floor had vanished beneath my chair, but I've never even been there, I said. I know. Then why would anyone? Rachel finished the sentence for me. Because if someone is planning to move you into assisted care quickly, they often secure a bed in advance. My voice barely came out. Are you saying Daniel already planned for me to live there? It's a strong possibility. The reality of it settled over me like a heavy fog. For months, Daniel had been living in my house, helping with bills, sorting mail, speaking to doctors, building a quiet story about my failing memory. And somewhere during all of that, he had already reserved a room in a memory care facility. Mrs. Baker Rachel said gently, "Yes, I think it's time we look at your house." "My house?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because if Daniel has been planning this for months, she said there may be documents, notes, or other evidence there." I swallowed. "You mean search my own home?" "Yes, without telling him yes." I looked at Denise again. Her expression was grim. Rachel continued, "My investigator Kevin Doyle can meet you there this afternoon. And if Daniel is home, then we wait." The idea of sneaking into my own house felt strange, but something inside me knew Rachel was right. If Daniel had been building this plan quietly, the truth might already be sitting somewhere inside the walls of my home. "Okay," I said finally. "Good," Rachel replied. "Kevin will call you shortly." The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. Denise sat down across from me. What did she say? I stared at the table. "She thinks Daniel already planned to move me into that facility." Denise exhaled slowly. And this afternoon, we're going to my house." Why I looked up, because if Daniel has been planning this, my voice trembled slightly, there may be proof hidden somewhere in my own home. The idea of searching my own house felt strange. For 40 years, that house had been the safest place in my life. Tom and I raised Daniel there. Every corner held a memory: birthday dinners in the dining room, Christmas mornings by the fireplace, summer evenings on the back porch. Now I was preparing to walk into it like a stranger, looking for evidence. Denise stood in her kitchen staring at me for a moment after the phone call ended. Well, she said quietly, "This just became a lot more serious." I nodded. "I know." She walked over to the sink and rinsed our glasses slowly. "Did Rachel say when this investigator is coming, he's going to call soon?" Right on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. My heart jumped as I answered. "Hello, Mrs. Baker." A calm male voice said, "Yes, my name is Kevin Doyle. I work with Rachel Monroe." "Oh, I understand you may need assistance reviewing your property this afternoon." The way he said it sounded almost casual, like we were discussing a routine appointment. "Yes," I said. "I'll be honest with you," Kevin continued. "Situations like this can be delicate. Is your son currently at the house?" "I don't think so. He believes I'm still at the hospital." "Good. Why?" "Because it's easier to look around when the person we're investigating isn't present." The word investigating still made me uncomfortable. "He's my son," I said quietly. Kevin's voice softened slightly. "I understand, Mrs. Baker, but right now our goal is simply to find facts. Facts, not accusations, not assumptions, just facts." "When can you meet us?" he asked. Rachel said this afternoon. "How about 2 o'clock? That works." "I'll meet you outside the property," Kevin said. "We'll walk through together." The call ended. Denise looked at me. "Well, 2 o'clock." She glanced at the clock. "Then we have about 3 hours. 3 hours before I returned to the house where my son had apparently been planning to remove me from my own life. The thought made my stomach twist. Denise must have noticed my expression. "Hey," she said gently, "whatever we find or don't find, you're not alone in this." I nodded. I know. But knowing and feeling were two very different things. The drive back to my neighborhood that afternoon felt surreal. Denise insisted on driving. "I want to see this with my own eyes," she said. As we turned onto Maple Street, the familiar view of my home came into sight. The red brick exterior, the white shutters Tom had painted himself, the maple tree in the front yard that Daniel had planted during a school project when he was 10 years old. Seeing it made my chest tighten. "How long has Daniel been staying with you?" Denise asked quietly. "About 7 months. And Lauren?" "She moved in with him." Denise slowed the car as we approached the curb. Another vehicle was already parked across the street. A tall man in his early 50s leaned against it, checking his watch. "That must be Kevin," Denise said. We stepped out of the car. Kevin Doyle walked over with a calm, professional expression. He wore dark jeans, a light jacket, and carried a small leather notebook. "Mrs. Baker," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you." His handshake was firm but not intimidating. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Of course." Kevin glanced toward the house. "Is anyone inside?" "I don't think so," I replied. "Good." He nodded once. "Let's take a look." Walking up the front path felt strangely emotional. The porch creaked slightly under our footsteps, just like it always had. For a moment I remembered Tom standing here on summer evenings, watering the flower boxes. Kevin noticed me pause. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled faintly of furniture polish and the lemon cleaner Lauren liked to use. Everything looked perfectly normal. The couch in the living room, Tom's old reading chair, the framed family photos along the hallway. But Kevin didn't waste time admiring memories. He stepped inside and immediately began scanning the room with a trained eye. First rule, he said calmly, is to look for patterns. "What kind of patterns?" Denise asked. "Documents, notes, timelines, anything suggesting planning." He walked toward the kitchen. "Most people preparing something complicated keep records somewhere." I felt a chill run through me. Records, proof. Kevin opened the kitchen drawer where Daniel had been keeping bills. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes. "Bank statements," Kevin said. He flipped through them quickly. "Utilities, insurance." Then he stopped. "What is it?" I asked. He held up a piece of paper. "Automatic payment authorization." "For what?" He read the header. "Maple Grove Memory Care Center." My stomach dropped again. Denise leaned closer. "What does it say?" Kevin scanned the document. "Monthly reservation deposit. For a room, yes. Under whose name?" He looked at the line. "Judith Baker." My heart pounded. "I never signed that." Kevin studied the signature carefully. "It appears to be yours. That's impossible." Denise placed a hand on my arm. "Could it have been part of those papers you signed after Tom passed away?" The memory returned again. Daniel sliding papers across the dining table. "Just routine updates, Mom. Sign here." My hands started shaking. Kevin placed the paper back on the counter. That's not all he said. He opened another drawer. Inside was a folder labeled Mom Care Plan. My chest tightened. Kevin pulled it out and placed it on the table. "Mrs. Baker," he said gently, "you may want to sit down." I lowered myself into a chair. Denise stood beside me. Kevin opened the folder. Inside were several pages. Typed notes, printed emails, calendar entries. He began flipping through them. "Timeline," he murmured. "Timeline," Denise asked. "Yes." "For what?" Kevin turned the page so we could see it. At the top was a heading, Judith Transition Plan. My breath caught. Kevin continued reading quietly. Step 1. Establish documentation of memory decline. Denise's eyes widened. Step 2. Secure power of attorney. I felt the room spin. Step 3. Arrange placement at Maple Grove Memory Care. My voice barely came out. Placement. Kevin turned another page. Step 4. Initiate guardianship petition if resistance occurs. The words felt like knives. Denise stared at the document in disbelief. "Who wrote this?" Kevin pointed to a name typed at the bottom. Daniel Baker. The room went silent. For a moment I couldn't even process what I was seeing. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just strange charges or confusing conversations. It was a written plan. A plan with steps. A plan with my name on it. Kevin closed the folder slowly. "I think we just found what Rachel was hoping for," he said. Denise looked at me with a mixture of shock and sympathy. "Judith?" But I could barely hear her, because one thought kept repeating in my mind over and over. My son hadn't just been worried about me. He had been organizing my removal from my own life, and he had written it all down. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The folder sat open on the kitchen table like something radioactive. Kevin Doyle stood beside it, hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter while Denise stared down at the pages as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. The words Judith Transition Plan burned in my mind. My own son had typed them. "How long has this been here?" Denise asked, finally her voice barely above a whisper. Kevin turned another page carefully. "There are dates on some of the notes," he said. What dates, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Kevin scanned the first sheet. "This one is from 4 months ago." 4 months. That was 3 months after Tom died. I gripped the edge of the table. "So he started planning this almost immediately," Denise said quietly. Kevin nodded. "It looks that way." My eyes moved across the pages again. The notes were methodical, organized, written with the calm tone of someone preparing a business proposal. Step 1. Establish documentation of memory decline. Step 2. Secure power of attorney. Step 3. Arrange placement at Maple Grove Memory Care. Step 4, initiate guardianship petition if resistance occurs. Resistance. That word stung the most. Not disagreement, not confusion. Resistance. As if I were some obstacle to be managed. I felt something shift inside my chest, something between grief and anger. Is there anything else in the folder, Denise asked. Kevin flipped through the remaining pages. Yes. What emails? He turned one page toward us. The printed message was clearly copied from a computer screen. The sender's name appeared at the top. Mark Ellison, who's that? Denise asked. Kevin skimmed the text quickly. Looks like a financial advisor. I leaned forward slightly. What does the email say? Kevin read aloud. Daniel. The key to making this work is consistency. The court needs to see a pattern of decline, not just isolated incidents. Document everything. Doctor visits are especially useful. My stomach twisted. Kevin continued. Also, securing financial authority early will make the transition smoother once placement becomes necessary. Denise's voice hardened. This guy is coaching him. It appears so, Kevin said. I stared at the email. A stranger had been advising my son on how to dismantle my independence. How many emails are there? I asked. Kevin counted quickly, about a dozen. From the same person? Yes. Denise folded her arms. This Mark Ellison sounds like trouble. Kevin nodded. I've heard the name before. You have? Denise asked. Yes, he said. He's been mentioned in a few elder financial exploitation cases. A chill ran down my spine. So Daniel wasn't doing this alone, I said. Probably not. Kevin turned to another page. This one outlines something interesting. What Denise asked. He pointed to a paragraph. Once Judith begins experiencing structured care at Maple Grove, resistance should decrease significantly. The environment will reinforce the narrative of cognitive decline. The words made my head spin. They planned to make me look confused by putting me somewhere unfamiliar, I said slowly. Denise's jaw tightened. That's manipulative. Kevin nodded. And effective, unfortunately. I leaned back in the chair. The kitchen felt different now, not like a home, like a stage where something had been rehearsed. How many people knew about this? I asked quietly. Kevin shrugged slightly. Hard to say. Denise walked slowly across the room. Judith, have you noticed anything else strange in the house lately? I thought about it. Then something came back to me. Daniel started keeping notes about my medications, I said. Where? In the office upstairs. Kevin immediately looked interested. Let's check. The three of us walked down the hallway toward Tom's old office. The door was half open. Inside, the room looked almost untouched. Tom's desk, his bookshelf, the old leather chair he loved. But now, another desk had been added against the wall. Daniel's laptop sat on top of it. Kevin approached the desk carefully. Do you mind if I look? He asked. It's my house, I said quietly. Fair point. He opened the top drawer. Inside were several small notebooks. Kevin flipped through one. Medication schedule. He turned another page. Daily observations. What kind of observations? Denise asked. Kevin read aloud. Judith forgot where she left her keys. That happened once, I said. Kevin continued. Judith repeated the same story twice during dinner. I frowned. I was telling two different people. He turned another page. Judith appeared confused about the date. That was the day after Tom's memorial service, I said. Of course I was confused. Kevin closed the notebook slowly. These entries are building a pattern. Exactly what that email suggested, Denise said. Yes. I walked toward the window. Outside the maple tree Daniel planted years ago swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. I remembered him digging that hole in the yard with a plastic shovel. Mom, this tree is going to grow bigger than the house one day, he had said proudly. Now that same boy had been documenting my supposed decline like a project. Kevin, I said quietly. Yes, is this enough evidence? He nodded slowly. It's strong. For what? To challenge any guardianship attempt. Denise looked relieved. So Rachel can stop this, most likely. Kevin paused. But there's something else. What I asked. He walked back toward the kitchen. The folder was still open on the table. Kevin flipped to the last page. This part worries me. Denise leaned over. What is it? Kevin pointed to a handwritten note at the bottom. Target date for placement within 48 hours of hospital documentation. My breath caught. Hospital documentation, Denise repeated. Kevin nodded. That likely refers to your visit yesterday. The room fell silent again. The pieces finally connected in my mind. Daniel pushing to take me to the hospital. Daniel telling the doctor I was confused. Daniel waiting downstairs to drive me home. "Kevin," I whispered. "Yes, I think I know what the plan was." "What do you mean?" I felt the truth settle heavily in my chest. "Yesterday wasn't just a doctor's visit." Denise looked at me slowly. "You think Daniel expected the hospital to support his story?" "Yes." Kevin nodded thoughtfully. "That would give him medical documentation." And then Denise said quietly he could file guardianship immediately. "And move you into Maple Grove," Kevin added. I felt cold all over. "That means," Denise finished the sentence, "you were supposed to disappear from this house by tomorrow." The reality of it struck me like a physical blow. If Dr. Harris hadn't slipped me that note, if I had simply gone home with Daniel, I might already be sitting in a memory care facility tonight, confused, alone, and legally powerless. Kevin closed the folder gently. "I think it's time to call Rachel," he said. I nodded slowly, because now the situation was no longer just suspicious. Now it was undeniable. My son had been planning to remove me from my own life, and if the doctor hadn't warned me, he might have succeeded. Kevin Doyle stood quietly at the kitchen counter with the folder still open in front of him. Denise leaned against the wall with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The afternoon sunlight coming through the window cast long shadows across the table, where Daniel's carefully written plan still lay. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air just before a thunderstorm. Finally, Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Rachel," he said. I nodded slowly. My voice didn't feel steady enough to speak. Kevin stepped a few feet away and dialed. Denise and I remained at the table, staring down at the pages that had just changed everything. I could still see the words "clearly target date for placement within 48 hours of hospital documentation." 48 hours. Yesterday had been the hospital visit, which meant Daniel had expected everything to happen by tomorrow. Tomorrow. The realization made my hands tremble again. Across the room, Kevin spoke quietly into the phone. "Yes, Rachel. We found it." A pause. "Yes, the plan. Written." Another pause. "Emails too, from someone named Mark Ellison." Denise leaned closer to me. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I shook my head slightly. "I feel like I'm reading someone else's nightmare." She squeezed my shoulder. Kevin ended the call and returned to the table. "Rachel wants copies of everything he said." "That makes sense," Denise replied. Kevin pulled a small portable scanner from his bag, something I hadn't even noticed he was carrying earlier. He began carefully scanning each page of the folder. The soft electronic beep repeated every few seconds. Each sound felt like another piece of proof locking into place. While Kevin worked, my eyes drifted slowly around the kitchen, the same kitchen where Daniel had eaten breakfast before school, the same kitchen where Tom had made pancakes every Sunday morning. Now it was the place where I discovered my son had been planning to remove me from my own life. The contrast made my chest ache. Denise noticed where I was looking. "Memories can make betrayal hurt even more," she said gently. "I keep wondering when he changed," I said quietly. "Sometimes people don't change," Denise replied. "Sometimes pressure reveals who they really are." Kevin finished scanning the last page and slipped the documents back into the folder. "Rachel is reviewing the files now," he said. "What happens next?" I asked. "Well, Kevin said carefully that depends on what Daniel does next." "What do you mean? If he believes the plan is still on track, he may try to move forward with the guardianship filing." "Even after yesterday, yes." Denise frowned. "But the hospital evaluation didn't support cognitive decline." Kevin nodded. "That's true, but he might not know that yet." The idea made my stomach twist. "So Daniel could still think everything is working," I said. "Exactly." Denise looked between us. "Then what do we do?" Kevin rested his hands on the back of one of the kitchen chairs. "We wait. For what I asked, for him to make his next move." Waiting sounded simple, but emotionally it felt unbearable, because now every moment would be filled with the knowledge that my own son had been planning something terrible. Suddenly my phone buzzed in my purse. The sound made me jump. Denise glanced at me. "Who is it?" I pulled out the phone. The screen lit up with a name that made my heart sink. Daniel. The three of us looked at each other. Kevin spoke first. "Answer it," Are you sure I asked? Yes, he said calmly. Act normal. Normal. The word felt almost impossible now. My hands shook slightly as I pressed the answer button. Hello, Daniel's voice came through the speaker. Mom, yes. Are you still at the hospital? For a split second, I hesitated. Kevin made a small gesture with his hand, reminding me of the story we had already told. Yes, I said. How are you feeling better? That's good. He paused. Listen, I've been thinking. My stomach tightened. About what? About your situation. My situation? Yeah, he said carefully. You've been under a lot of stress since Dad died. There it was again. The narrative. The same soft tone he had used with the doctor. You've had some memory problems lately, he continued. Denise's eyes narrowed. I'm doing fine, I said. I know you feel that way, Daniel replied gently. But sometimes people don't see their own changes. The words sounded rehearsed, almost professional. My grip tightened on the phone. What are you saying? I asked. I think it might be a good idea for you to stay somewhere where professionals can help for a while. My heart pounded. Help with what? Just until things stabilize. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Daniel. I'm already at the hospital, I know, he said. That's why this is the perfect time. The kitchen suddenly felt ice cold. What do you mean? I've been talking to a facility called Maple Grove, he said calmly. Denise's jaw tightened. Kevin's expression hardened. They specialize in memory care. Daniel continued. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Daniel, why are you telling me this? Because the hospital evaluation yesterday confirmed some concerns. That was the moment I realized something chilling. Daniel didn't know the doctor had warned me. He believed the hospital visit had supported his story. I think it would be best if we moved forward with the placement tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. Just like the plan in the folder. I forced myself to stay calm. You've already arranged that, I asked. Yes. How long have you been planning this? There was a brief pause. Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder. The word stung. I'm doing this for you, he said softly. The room spun slightly, because in that moment I understood something terrible. Daniel truly believed his own justification. In his mind, this wasn't betrayal, it was management. Mom, he said when I didn't answer, yes. I'll come by the hospital tonight so we can talk about the paperwork. Paperwork, guardianship, placement, all the steps I'd just seen written in his plan. Okay, I said quietly. Good, Daniel replied. We'll take care of everything. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. Denise looked at me with wide eyes. What did he say? My voice trembled slightly. He thinks the hospital visit confirmed his story. Kevin nodded grimly. That means he's about to act. Denise crossed her arms. He wants to move her to Maple Grove tomorrow. Kevin exhaled slowly. Then we need to move faster. I looked at him. What do you mean? Kevin met my eyes. It's time to stop waiting. The quiet tension in the room suddenly shifted because now we knew something important. Daniel believed his plan was still working, and that meant he was about to make his biggest move. But this time, he wouldn't be the only one prepared. For a moment after the call ended, the kitchen felt completely still. The clock above the refrigerator ticked softly, marking each second with quiet precision. Outside the window, a car drove past on Maple Street, its tires whispering across the pavement. But inside the house, everything had changed. Denise broke the silence first. Well, she said slowly, that confirms it. I nodded, though my chest still felt tight. He believes the hospital supports him, I said. Kevin Doyle leaned back against the counter, thinking. That's actually good news. I looked up. Good news, yes. How because Daniel thinks he has the advantage, Kevin explained. That means he's going to move forward exactly the way he planned. Denise frowned slightly, and that helps us how Kevin crossed his arms. Because Rachel can now stop him in the act. The words settled in my mind slowly. Stop him. Not later. Not eventually. But while he was trying to do it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. Daniel. I opened it carefully. Daniel, Mom, I spoke with Maple Grove again. They're ready to receive you tomorrow afternoon. Don't worry about anything. I'll handle the paperwork. The calm tone of the message made my stomach twist. He wasn't even pretending to ask my opinion. Denise read the message over my shoulder. He's very confident, she said. Yes, Kevin replied quietly. Too confident. Just then, Kevin's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. That's Rachel. He answered immediately and switched the phone to speaker. Rachel, we're all here. Rachel Monroe's voice filled the kitchen. Good, I just finished reviewing the documents Kevin sent. What do you think Denise asked? There was a short pause. I think Daniel Baker just handed us everything we need. My heart skipped. Everything I asked. Yes. How Rachel's voice remained calm and precise. The written plan, the emails from Mark Ellison and the financial authorization documents create a very clear pattern. A pattern of what Denise asked. Intentional manipulation. Kevin nodded. That's what I thought, Rachel continued, but there's something even more important. What I asked. The phone call. The one Judith just had with Daniel. Yes. My stomach tightened. What about it? Rachel's voice sharpened slightly. He confirmed the placement at Maple Grove and stated that he intends to move you there tomorrow. Yes, that means we now have evidence of attempted coercive relocation. The legal language sounded complicated, but the meaning was simple. Daniel was about to try to remove me from my home. What happens next? Denise asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. We confront him. I blinked. Confront him. Yes, when tonight. The word echoed through the kitchen. Tonight, I repeated. Yes, Rachel said. Why tonight? Because Daniel believes you're still vulnerable and unaware. If we allow him to continue under that assumption, he will expose the full extent of his plan. Kevin nodded slowly. That makes sense. Denise looked uneasy. What kind of confrontation are we talking about? Rachel answered calmly. A controlled meeting. With who? Denise asked. With Daniel, Judith, myself, and, if necessary, a representative from the probate court. My heart began beating faster again. You mean a legal confrontation? Yes. And Daniel won't expect that. Exactly. Kevin stepped closer to the phone. Where do you want it to happen? Rachel answered immediately. Judith's house. I looked around the kitchen. The idea of confronting my son here, surrounded by the evidence of his plan, felt surreal. He's planning to come to the hospital tonight, I said. Rachel paused. Then we changed the location. How Judith, you call him back. My hands tightened slightly. And say what? Tell him you've been discharged. That part is true, Denise said quietly. Yes, Rachel agreed. Tell him you're home now and ready to talk about the paperwork. Kevin smiled faintly. He'll come running, Rachel continued. When he arrives, we'll already be there. I swallowed. You mean? He walks into a trap. Not a trap, Rachel corrected calmly. A conversation he can't manipulate. Denise exhaled slowly. This is going to be intense. Yes, Rachel said, but necessary. I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Fear, anger, sadness, and something else. Resolve. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't powerless. Rachel, I said quietly, yes, what if Daniel denies everything he might? And if he does, then we show him the evidence. Kevin tapped the folder on the table, which is pretty convincing. Denise looked at me. Are you ready for this? The question hit harder than I expected, because confronting my son wasn't just about stopping a legal plan. It meant accepting something painful. That the person I had trusted most had been quietly preparing to take control of my life. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I thought about Tom, about the years we had spent building this home together, about the quiet dignity he always valued. When I opened my eyes again, my voice felt steadier. Yes, I said. Rachel spoke again through the phone. Good, Kevin and I will be there by 6. Denise glanced at the clock. That gives us about 2 hours. Rachel added one more thing before ending the call. Judith. Yes, remember something important tonight. What you are not the one on trial. The call ended. The kitchen grew quiet again. Denise leaned back against the counter. Well, she said slowly, this is going to be one unforgettable family meeting. Kevin picked up the folder and closed it carefully. Family meeting is one way to describe it. I stood up and walked toward the living room window. Outside, the late afternoon sun had begun to dip lower behind the trees. In just a few hours, Daniel would walk through the front door expecting to finalize his plan. He believed I was still confused, still vulnerable, still easy to control. But tonight he was going to learn something he hadn't expected. His mother had finally seen the truth. And the plan he thought was perfect was about to collapse. The next 2 hours passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Denise insisted on making dinner, though none of us were particularly hungry. The quiet rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring a pot on the stove seemed to calm her nerves. Kevin Doyle spent most of the time on the phone with Rachel Monroe, confirming details and making sure every piece of evidence was organized. I sat in the living room staring at the same family photographs that had hung on the wall for years. There was one picture of Daniel when he was about 7 years old, missing his front teeth and grinning proudly while holding a baseball trophy. Another showed him standing between Tom and me at his high school graduation, his arm draped across his father's shoulders. I studied those pictures and wondered where that boy had gone. The man who had written Judith's transition plan felt like a stranger. At exactly 5:45, a car pulled into the driveway. Denise looked out the window. That must be Rachel. Kevin opened the front door before she even reached the porch. Rachel Monroe stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. She looked calm, composed, and entirely focused. "Good evening," she said. "Thanks for coming," Denise replied. Rachel placed the briefcase on the dining table and glanced around the room. "Is Daniel on his way?" "Not yet," Kevin said. Rachel opened her case and began removing documents. "These are copies of everything we collected today," she explained. "The folder, the emails, the financial records." She laid them neatly across the table. "And this," she added, holding up another set of papers, "is a notice revoking any power of attorney Daniel may claim to have." I leaned forward slightly. "That can be done." "Yes," Rachel said, "especially when there's evidence the authority was obtained through deception." Denise folded her arms. "So tonight he either admits what he's done or we show him the paperwork." Rachel nodded. "Exactly." The clock on the wall read 6:18 p.m. My heart began beating faster. "He said he would come tonight," I said quietly. Rachel looked at me. "Are you ready?" I thought about the past 24 hours. The doctor's note, the hospital hallway, the folder in my kitchen, and the realization that my own son had been preparing to erase my independence. "Yes," I said. Before anyone else could speak, headlights flashed across the living room walls. A car door slammed outside. Denise glanced toward the window. "That's him." My chest tightened. Kevin walked calmly to the front door and opened it. Daniel Baker stepped inside a moment later. He looked relaxed, confident, almost cheerful. For a second, his smile remained in place. Then he saw Rachel, then Kevin, then Denise. The smile faded. "What's going on?" he asked. Rachel stepped forward first. "Good evening, Mr. Baker." Daniel looked confused. "Who are you?" "My name is Rachel Monroe." "I'm your mother's attorney." The word attorney landed like a stone in the room. Daniel turned toward me. "Mom." I held his gaze. "Sit down, Daniel." He didn't move. "What is this?" Rachel gestured toward the dining table. "Just a conversation." Daniel's eyes moved slowly across the room. Kevin, Denise, the open folder on the table. His expression shifted from confusion to something sharper. "Mom," he said carefully, "you told me you were at the hospital." "I was. So why am I here?" Rachel answered before I could. "Because we'd like to discuss your plans for Maple Grove memory care." Daniel froze. The silence lasted only a second. Then he laughed softly. "Oh," he said. "That." He walked into the room and pulled out a chair. "Well, that's actually good timing," he said, sitting down. "I wanted to talk about that tonight." Denise stared at him. "You're serious," Daniel shrugged. "Of course I'm serious." Rachel opened the folder slowly. "Daniel," she said calmly, "your mother has reviewed the documents you prepared." He blinked. "What documents?" Rachel turned the first page toward him. The heading was clearly visible. Judith's transition plan. For the first time since he entered the house, Daniel looked surprised. His eyes flicked from the page to me. "You went through my things," Kevin spoke evenly. "This is Mrs. Baker's house." Daniel ignored him. "Mom, you had no right to know, right?" Denise interrupted. "You were planning to lock her in a facility." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "That's not what this is." Rachel slid the printed emails across the table. "And these?" Daniel glanced at them quickly. "That's just advice." "From Mark Ellison," Rachel asked. "Yes. The same advisor currently under investigation for elder financial exploitation." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're twisting things." Rachel's tone remained calm. "No, Daniel. We're clarifying them." She tapped the page again. "Your written plan outlines a sequence. Create medical documentation. Secure financial authority placed Judith Baker in memory care. Daniel looked directly at me. Mom, you know why I did that. I felt my chest tighten. Explain it to me. He sighed heavily as if he were the one being forced into something uncomfortable. Because you need help. I do. Yes, he said firmly. Your memory hasn't been the same since Dad died. That's grief, I said. That's denial, he replied. The room fell silent. Rachel spoke again. Daniel, your mother passed a full cognitive evaluation yesterday. He frowned. That's not what the doctor told me. Rachel's eyes sharpened slightly. Dr. Harris did not diagnose cognitive decline. Daniel shifted in his chair. Well, he said there were concerns. No, Rachel replied. You said there were concerns. Kevin crossed his arms. And you documented those concerns yourself. Daniel glanced toward the notebooks on the table. That's just responsible caregiving? Denise shook her head. You wrote down normal behavior and labeled it confusion. Daniel's voice grew defensive. I was protecting her. From what I asked, quietly. From herself. The words hung in the air. Rachel slid another document forward. The financial authorization request you filed with the bank yesterday, she said. Daniel stiffened. That was necessary. Necessary for what? For managing her accounts. You mean controlling them, Kevin said. Daniel's temper finally surfaced. Someone has to. The outburst echoed through the room. Then he looked directly at me again. You're not capable of handling everything anymore. The words cut deeper than I expected. Is that really what you believe? I asked. Yes. Rachel leaned forward. Then perhaps you can explain something. Daniel frowned. What Rachel pointed to the final page in the folder, the line written in his own handwriting. Target date for placement within 48 hours of hospital documentation. Daniel stared at it. For a moment he said nothing. Then Rachel asked the question that changed everything. Daniel, she said quietly. Yes. Were you planning to move your mother to Maple Grove tomorrow? The room held its breath. Daniel hesitated. Then he said the one thing none of us expected. Yes. Denise's jaw dropped. Kevin shook his head slowly. And I felt something inside me finally break. Because in that moment, my son didn't deny the plan. He admitted it. For a few seconds after Daniel said yes, the room felt completely frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the ticking clock on the kitchen wall seemed suddenly louder. Denise was the first to react. You were actually going to do it, she said, disbelief filling her voice. Daniel didn't look ashamed. If anything, he looked frustrated that the conversation had taken this direction. I told you, he said, looking directly at me. It was necessary. The word hit me like a slap. Necessary, I repeated quietly. Yes. Rachel Monroe remained calm, though I noticed the way her eyes sharpened slightly. Daniel, she said evenly, you understand that forcibly placing someone in a memory care facility without medical justification can have serious legal consequences. Daniel waved a dismissive hand. It wouldn't be forced. Oh, Rachel asked. No, he said confidently. It would be medically recommended. Kevin Doyle leaned forward slightly. Except the medical evaluation yesterday didn't support that. Daniel's confidence flickered for the first time. What do you mean? Rachel folded her hands on the table. Dr. Harris performed a full cognitive screening. Judith passed. Daniel blinked. That's not what he told me. Rachel's voice remained steady. Dr. Harris did not diagnose cognitive impairment. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Then why did he keep her for observation? He didn't, Rachel said calmly. Judith chose to stay longer to consider her options. The room grew quiet again. Daniel turned toward me slowly. You stayed there, on purpose. Yes, why? I held his gaze. Because the doctor warned me. For the first time since he entered the house, Daniel looked genuinely shocked. Warned you? Yes, about what? About you. The words landed heavily between us. Daniel stared at me as if he had misheard. That's ridiculous. Is it? Denise said sharply. Rachel slid the doctor's note across the table. This is the message Dr. Harris gave Judith. Daniel read the single sentence. As his eyes moved across the paper, his face slowly changed. What is this? He demanded. It's a warning, Rachel said. Daniel laughed bitterly. So now you're all taking the word of a doctor over your own son. No, I said quietly. I'm taking the word of evidence. Rachel tapped the folder. The plan, the emails, the financial authorization request. Daniel pushed the papers aside. You're twisting everything. Kevin shook his head. No one twisted anything, you wrote it yourself. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't understand the situation. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Then help us understand. Daniel exhaled heavily. For the first time, his confidence seemed to crack. You want to know the truth, he said. Yes, Rachel replied. He looked at me. Fine. The room grew very still. My business failed, he said. The admission hung in the air. I blinked. What my consulting firm, Daniel continued. It collapsed 6 months ago. I stared at him. You never told me, because I didn't want you to worry. Denise crossed her arms. So instead you decided to take control of her finances. It wasn't like that. Kevin raised an eyebrow. Then explain it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I had debts, he said. How much? Rachel asked. Enough. That's not an answer. Daniel hesitated. Almost $300,000. Denise's eyes widened. $300,000, Daniel nodded grimly. Loans, credit lines, business investments. I felt dizzy. Daniel, why didn't you tell me? Because you would have tried to help. And that would have been wrong. Yes. The answer stunned me. Why? I asked. Because it wasn't your responsibility. Rachel spoke quietly, but controlling her finances was Daniel turned toward her. You don't get it. Then explain it. Daniel's voice rose slightly. If the bank came after me, they could have taken everything. Denise frowned. Everything you own. Daniel looked directly at me. No, he said. Everything Mom owns. The room fell silent again. Rachel's expression hardened. So the plan was to protect your creditors from accessing Judith's assets. Daniel shrugged slightly. That's one way to put it. Kevin spoke flatly. That's fraud. Daniel's eyes flashed. No, it's survival. I felt my chest tighten painfully. You were willing to declare your own mother incompetent just to protect yourself from debt. Daniel's voice softened slightly. It wasn't just about me. Oh, Denise said. It was also about you, he said, pointing at me. How you shouldn't be living alone anymore. I'm not alone, I replied. You would have been. His voice softened. Dad's gone. The mention of Tom sent a sharp ache through my chest. Daniel continued. You've been struggling since he died. That's grief, I said again. It's decline, he insisted. Rachel shook her head slowly. The medical evaluation contradicts that. Daniel looked at her angrily. I've watched my mother for months and documented every moment, Kevin added. Daniel ignored him. I know what I've seen. Then explain something, Rachel said calmly. What? If your goal was simply to protect your mother, why the financial transfers? Daniel froze. Rachel continued. The Maple Grove deposit, the bank authorization, the attempt to access Judith's investment accounts. Daniel's face reddened slightly. That was temporary. For what purpose? Rachel asked. To stabilize things. Kevin shook his head. You mean pay your debts? Daniel slammed his hand on the table. I was going to fix everything. The outburst echoed through the room. Then his voice dropped again. Once things were stable, Mom would have been safe. Safe. The words sounded hollow. Locked in a facility, Denise said. For her protection, Daniel insisted. For your convenience, Kevin corrected. Daniel turned toward me again. Mom, you know I love you. The sentence hurt more than anything else he had said, because once upon a time I had believed it completely. I do love you, he continued. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Rachel spoke instead. Daniel Baker, based on the evidence we've reviewed today, your attempt to obtain control over Judith Baker's finances and living arrangements under false pretenses may constitute financial exploitation. Daniel scoffed. You're threatening me now. I'm explaining reality, Kevin added calmly, and reality is about to get a lot more complicated for you. Daniel looked around the room again, at the folder, at the emails, at the people who now understood exactly what he had done. For the first time since this conversation began, he looked uncertain, and I realized something important. The confidence he walked into this house with was gone. His plan had collapsed, and now he was starting to understand that the consequences were real. For a moment after Rachel Monroe finished speaking, the entire room seemed to fall silent again. Daniel sat in the dining chair with his shoulders stiff, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The confidence he had walked into the house with earlier was gone now, replaced by something far less certain. Fear. Kevin Doyle leaned against the counter quietly, arms folded, watching Daniel with the calm patience of someone who had seen situations like this unfold before. Denise stood beside me near the kitchen doorway, her expression firm but concerned. Rachel remained seated across from Daniel, completely composed. No one rushed to fill the silence, because the truth had already been spoken. Daniel finally exhaled slowly. "So what happens now?" he asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened the briefcase beside her and removed a single document. She placed it carefully on the table. "This," she said, "is a revocation of power of attorney." Daniel looked down at the paper. His jaw tightened. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Rachel explained calmly, "that any authority you believe you have over Judith Baker's finances or medical decisions is officially terminated. You can't just do that," Daniel said. "Yes," Rachel replied, "we can." She pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the page. "Judith retains full legal capacity. The cognitive evaluation confirms that." Daniel turned toward me. "You're actually doing this?" I held his gaze. "Yes." His expression hardened. "You're choosing them over your own son." The accusation stung. "I'm choosing the truth," I said quietly. Denise stepped forward. "And the truth is, you tried to manipulate her." Daniel glared at her. "This doesn't concern you." Kevin spoke from the counter. "It concerns anyone watching a vulnerable person being exploited." Daniel shot him an angry look. "You're a private investigator, not a judge." "No," Kevin said calmly, "but judges tend to appreciate evidence." Rachel slid another set of papers across the table. "These are copies of the documents we discovered in your office." Daniel didn't look at them. "Your written plan," Rachel continued, "combined with the financial authorization request and the facility reservation, creates a clear timeline of intent." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So what?" "You think you're going to take me to court?" Rachel's voice remained even. "That depends on what happens next." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Rachel said, "that your mother now has several options, such as filing a formal complaint for financial exploitation." Daniel scoffed. "That's ridiculous." Or Rachel continued, calmly, "seeking a restraining order preventing you from accessing her finances or property." The words hung in the air. Daniel's expression changed again. "You would actually do that?" he asked me. I felt a wave of sadness rise in my chest. "I never wanted things to reach this point," I said. "But they have." He shook his head slowly. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" "Yes," he said, "because you don't understand how bad things are for me." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "You're in debt, more than you realize. That still doesn't give you the right to take control of my life." Daniel's voice softened slightly. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. You were planning to put me in a facility. For your safety. For your convenience," Denise corrected again. Daniel ignored her. "You've been struggling since Dad died," he said. "Yes," I replied quietly. "I have, and that's exactly why I needed to step in." "Step in," I repeated. "Yes." I looked around the room slowly, at the house Tom and I built together, at the kitchen table where our family had shared thousands of meals. Then I looked back at Daniel. "You didn't step in," I said softly. "You tried to take over." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because deep down he knew the truth. Rachel closed the folder of evidence. "Daniel," she said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question." He looked up. "What are you willing to stop this?" He hesitated. "What do you mean, I mean?" Rachel said calmly, "Are you willing to withdraw the financial authorization request and cancel the Maple Grove placement?" Daniel looked from Rachel to me, then to the papers on the table. For the first time that evening, his voice sounded uncertain. "If I do that—" "Yes," Rachel prompted. "Will this go away?" Rachel considered the question carefully. "That depends on your future actions." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that if you respect Judith's independence from this moment forward, there may be no reason to pursue further legal action." Daniel's eyes moved slowly toward me. "You're really serious about this," he said. "Yes," I replied. The room fell quiet again. Daniel stared down at the table for several long seconds. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded tired. "Fine." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Fine." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll cancel the placement. And the bank request?" Rachel asked. "I'll withdraw it." Kevin straightened slightly. "Immediately." Daniel sighed. "Yes." Rachel slid another sheet of paper toward him, then signed this acknowledgement. He glanced at the document. What is it? A statement confirming you are voluntarily withdrawing any attempt to obtain guardianship or financial authority. Daniel hesitated. Then he picked up the pen. The scratching sound of the signature echoed softly across the quiet kitchen. When he finished, he pushed the paper back toward Rachel. There, he said. Rachel reviewed it carefully before placing it inside her briefcase. Thank you, she said. Daniel stood up slowly. For the first time since arriving, he looked uncertain about what to do next. His eyes moved toward me again. Mom. Yes, I never meant for things to get this far. The apology sounded weak, not because the words were wrong, but because they had come too late. I believe you didn't plan to hurt me, I said quietly, but you still did. Daniel lowered his eyes. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he turned toward the door. I'll cancel everything tonight, he said. Rachel nodded. We'll confirm with the bank tomorrow. Daniel paused in the doorway. Then he looked back at me one last time. I really did think I was helping, he said softly. I didn't answer, because sometimes the most painful truths are the simplest ones, and the truth was, help should never feel like control. Daniel stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house. For several seconds, none of us moved. Then Denise exhaled slowly. Well, she said, that was something. Kevin nodded. Yes, it was. Rachel closed her briefcase and stood. Judith, she said gently. Yes, you handled that remarkably well. I wasn't sure if that was true. Because at that moment, the only thing I felt was a deep, quiet exhaustion, the kind that comes when a long fight finally ends. But even as the tension slowly faded from the room, one realization remained clear in my mind. If Dr. Harris hadn't slipped that note into my hand at the hospital, I might not be standing in my own kitchen tonight. After Daniel left, the house remained quiet for a long time. Not the peaceful quiet I remembered from years ago when Tom would sit in his armchair reading while soft music played from the radio. This was a different kind of silence, heavy, reflective, like the air after a storm has finally passed, but the ground is still wet. Denise moved first. Well, she said softly, walking toward the sink that may have been the most uncomfortable family dinner I've ever witnessed. Kevin chuckled quietly. I've seen worse. Rachel Monroe closed her briefcase and looked at me. How are you feeling? I leaned back in the kitchen chair and exhaled slowly. Relieved, I said. Then I paused. And heartbroken. Rachel nodded with understanding. That's a normal combination. Denise placed a glass of water in front of me. You just confronted your own son about trying to take control of your life, she said. That's not exactly a casual Tuesday evening. Kevin checked his watch. Rachel and I will follow up with the bank first thing tomorrow morning, he said. We'll make sure Daniel's authorization request is officially canceled. Rachel nodded. And we'll also notify Maple Grove that the reservation is void. The words gave me a strange sense of closure. For the first time since discovering that name on my bank statement, the idea of being sent there no longer hovered over me like a shadow. Thank you, I said quietly. Rachel smiled slightly. You did the hard part. Kevin gathered his notebook. Before we leave, he added, there's one more thing you should consider. What I asked, changing your locks. Denise nodded immediately. That's a good idea. I thought about it for a moment. The idea of locking Daniel out of the house he had grown up in felt painful. But tonight had shown me something important. Trust had already been broken. Yes, I said finally. I'll arrange a locksmith tomorrow. Kevin smiled slightly. Smart decision. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You took back control tonight, Judith. The words felt strange. Control. For months, I hadn't realized how quietly it had been slipping away. Rachel and Kevin left soon after that. Denise stayed. She insisted on making tea and sat with me at the kitchen table while the evening slowly turned into night. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. Sometimes the best comfort is simply knowing someone is there. Eventually, Denise stood and stretched. I should probably head home, she said, but I'm only 5 minutes away if you need anything. Thank you, I replied. She hugged me tightly before leaving. The house felt different once she was gone, quieter, but not empty. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt peaceful. I walked slowly through the living room. The familiar objects around me suddenly looked clearer. Tom's old reading chair, the photo albums on the shelf, the small scratch on the wooden coffee table where Daniel had accidentally dropped a toy truck when he was 6 years old. Every piece of the house carried a memory, and every memory reminded me of something important. This life had been built slowly, carefully, with love. No one had the right to take it away. I stopped in the hallway and looked at the framed photograph of Tom hanging near the staircase. He was smiling, the way he always had, calm, steady, reassuring. For a moment I imagined what he would have said if he had been here during all of this. Probably something simple, something quiet but firm. Tom had always believed that dignity was one of the most important things a person could protect. "Don't let anyone take away your voice," he once told me years ago during a difficult moment in our lives. I touched the frame gently. Tonight I had finally remembered those words. The house was still mine. My decisions were still mine. My life was still mine. And that realization brought a deep sense of calm. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs to my bedroom. The bed felt enormous without Tom beside me, but for the first time in many months, I felt something close to peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because the fear was. Daniel's plan had failed, not through revenge, not through anger, but through truth. As I lay there in the quiet darkness, one final thought returned to me. The moment in the hospital hallway when Dr. Harris pressed that folded note into my hand. A small gesture, a single sentence written on a piece of paper, and yet it had changed everything. Because sometimes the difference between losing everything and protecting your life comes down to one person who is brave enough to speak the truth, and one moment when you are brave enough to listen. Eventually, sleep came. Deep, peaceful. And when morning sunlight filled the room the next day, I woke up knowing something important. My life had not ended with betrayal. It had simply entered a new chapter, one where my voice mattered more than ever. Life has a strange way of testing the boundaries of trust. Most of us grow up believing that the people closest to us will always protect us. We believe that family automatically means loyalty, honesty, and care. And for many people, that belief is true. But sometimes, love becomes tangled with fear, desperation, or greed. When that happens, the line between helping and controlling can disappear. What I learned through this experience is something I wish every person, especially older adults, understood clearly. Your independence is not a gift someone else can take away when it becomes inconvenient. Your voice matters. Your decisions matter. And no matter how close someone is to you, no one has the right to quietly rewrite your life without your consent. There is also another lesson in this story. Sometimes the people who save us are not the ones we expect. A doctor who noticed something wrong, a friend who listened, a lawyer who believed the truth mattered. Those small acts of courage can change everything. So if you take anything away from my story, let it be this. Always pay attention to the quiet voice inside you when something feels wrong, because that voice might be the one thing standing between you and losing everything you worked your whole life to build. And now I want to ask you something. If you had been in my place that day in the hospital, would you have gotten in the car with your son? Tell me honestly in the comments. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if stories like this remind you how important truth and courage are, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening to my story.